Well, welcome back, folks. I'm joined here by a very special guest, course designer Leonard Muise. Leonard, my friend, thank you for joining us. You are very particular about your course designs,
Yep.
and you've been designing courses for a very long time. And like we talked about at the press conference, you have 200 acres, you have
Yeah.
redwoods, you have valley oaks, but you have flat ground. What has been the biggest challenge designing this course and refining it over time?
You have constraints of the property. And honestly, on top of the natural constraints is a small sample set of data. I don't travel with the tour, right? I see them come here and play my designs. I see a couple other events in the whole year in person. And so my ability to really understand what they can and can't do is a challenge for me. I think I get it right most of the time, but honestly, that's in my mind sort of a weak spot. It's a challenge for me to figure out how to apply that to a given space. So that's a concern here. Totally apart from the particular terrain that's here. So that's often in my mind is just getting a refined sense of what are they capable of.
Well, how it's playing this weekend.
Yeah.
It was interesting. The hot rounds for MPO and FPO are very similar round after round.
Sure.
It was a 10 down and then a 9 down for MPO, FPO round one. I think it was a 12 and then a 13 round two. That's got to be something to be proud of. It's tough to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers themselves are not something I aspire to, but to me, they do reflect something I think is successful. When I check the data later, I'll be a little more sure. But generally, what I'm looking for is a course that's hard to birdie. And I don't want every hole to be the same level of difficulty, but there's a general level of difficulty I'm trying to have across the entire course. Hard to birdie, but if you get on a streak without getting crazy hot, just a little hot, suddenly your 40-foot putts become 25-foot putts. It's just a little difference, but you've cranked it up just enough, and next thing you know, you're shooting double digits. Meanwhile, the rest of the field is getting the 40-foot putts, and because the course is tough, it's hard to get to 40 feet. Mm-hmm. And then you see 4s and 5s and 6s as solid scores. People may be shooting their ratings, but they're 5 strokes back in that round.
Well, let's zoom in on a couple holes here. Me and Nate Perkins have a bet on hole number 3.
Yeah.
It's a short hole, but you've adjusted a couple things to make it really tricky. We're going to fly number 3.
Cool.
Talk about your thoughts behind this.
Well, first of all, I love the space, and I've always seen this space as what I imagine with jealousy is what Midwest parks look like. Oh my gosh, all these big trees, unevenly spaced, perfect golf terrain. And then the first 2 years, I designed holes that I thought were not very good. So in this case, I'm like, rather than giving the simple hyzer, I have to ask them to control their line. I don't need it to be a distant throw, right? I need to back off the power a little bit to see if I get some mids and fairways off the tee. But in this case, I saw that it was all that you'd want. I love giving players choices, and when you design in an open space, you kind of can't block off options anyway, right? But the pure shot up the middle, that's a good test of anybody's skill, right? It's like, can you just keep, 15-foot wide gap? Can you run that for 300 feet? But then I saw the sneaky lines, right? And so there's a really tight flex line. I mean, and that's, I thought maybe 10% of the players would go that line. There you go. That's the shot I thought most would play. Just go up the gut. Frankly, I think that's the safest line. If you hit a tree there, you're not going to miss a mando, and you can park it, right? Let's see what Paul does here. Yeah, Paul also does the same thing. Looks like he pulled it a tiny bit, but then he got through the line clean.
And I think you can go flat. You can go hyzer flip up the middle. So we had a few players.
There it is. Yep. That's a skinny flex line. I don't think that's more than 4 feet wide visually, right?
And here's that really classic Gannon Burr steep overstable flex line. You want to see players try that shot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I generally on a given hole, I'm conscious of if you've got every shot in the book, what's the best play? But if you have a preference that you like to force, maybe the odds aren't as good, but it's there for you if you want to chase it, right? And in this hole, I saw all 3 options. The other thing is weird about that. It's always been my sense, even when I wasn't designing for pros. Variety's fun. Give people a different choice. You play in your neighborhood course all the time. If there's more than one line to play, it's fun that you're not locked into one line. I was surprised first time the pros came here. They like having fun playing too. And I got some feedback that when they were practicing or competing on the course, so-and-so was throwing the hyzer and the other guy was throwing the roller and the other guy was going forehand flex or whatever the case may be. And they thought it was interesting both to figure out what worked for them, but to entertaining to watch their fellow players not throw the exact same line. And to be honest with you, I'm all technical about, I want to see them, I want to test this skill and see how well they can do it and give them this option that's not as really as clean. But I didn't think about, it'd be fun for them too. And so, this hole now is just like, it's a perfect representation of the sort of balance I like. Mm-hmm. There's a safer, perhaps smarter route up the gut. But if you're comfortable, Nico, right, loves that flex as well. The other thing you learn here is that players, and Ricky taught me this and a few others, again, it's one of those moments, it makes sense to you once you realize it, but it takes some experience before you kind of grasp it properly in your head. Players get a comfort zone. And if you show them a shot in the round and they execute it well, they'll go back to that shot. Mm-hmm. Even if you think you've provided certain options along the way, they'll lean into that option. And so here I've got 3 now flex shots that are fairly similar on holes 3, 13, and 15. Mm-hmm. And if you're comfortable with that, you can get that groove going. Great, do that.
Well, let's zoom into one more hole, and it's a hole that I really love watching the players play. Hole number 16. Let's fly 16. Talk to me about this hole and how you've kind of refined it over time. What's your thought
Well,
here?
This is backwards of the first hole we played here. It was hole 3, which was nasty with a narrow gap right off the tee when we first came here. And so when I saw this, it's a more severe version of that. So, I shudder as a player thinking about getting through that gap. Once you do the gap, it's pretty straightforward in that you're trying to work it right if you can. Now, if you're a power player that can set up and throw the spike hyzer over the top, actually left is probably better, so that you're not coming at an angle more toward the water on the second shot. But generally, you want to move right so you can hit the low gap that's to the right of what we're seeing here. And then it's just tough. It's long, right? So a perfect setup leaves you still 400 feet. And then the grass doesn't skip, which a couple players mentioned to me, and Mother Nature made that harder this year. It was so wet here and everything grew so thick. So once you penetrate that gap with a hyzer flip or maybe a blind hyzer like Rathman did yesterday, where the coverage is like, that might be good, and then they walk up and it's 25 feet.
Yeah.
Probably skip like 5 feet, right? You just got to air it almost all the way to it. This is like what's now 11, 4 years ago when we first came here. When we did hole 11, it's the double water carry, and it was hole 10 back then. We looked at it, and I'm like, I love the idea of cutting the corner by taking on more water, and so I knew I wanted that hole. So you could go 440 to the sort of the short entry, or 490 to get the backdoor setup. I thought, I think this is where the game is at, but I'm not sure if this is asking too much. And then, of course, honestly, the data that year, I think we had 11% birdies of the 10, 20 and up players, which I call the contenders, and is kind of where I do my data. I don't look at the whole field. And so that kind of measured up pretty well. It's tough, but gettable, 11%. 2 years later, 23% of the players were birdieing that hole of the contenders.
Interesting.
Like, what?
They're getting better.
I thought we might be asking too much, that it might become kind of a tweener hole where most everyone's just going to get par because the birdie's so hard, right? More than a bonus birdie, like a double bonus birdie, right? Now it's kind of a standard difficulty hole if you want to have a tough course. 23% of the contenders get it. So I kind of had that same thought about 16 when we did it, is like, are we pushing too much?
Yeah.
It's so narrow off the tee. There's trouble. The second shot, brutal. Spike hyzers go in the water even more than the flat shot does. It's amazing. And the player, and again, the data showing that it's gettable. And this tournament, for whatever reason, maybe because of the Champions Cup announcement, I've got a lot more player feedback this time, and I love it.
Great.
So eager to have any bit of feedback. If there's a flag that's not standing up straight, I want to hear that. I had a lot of players come and tell me, 16, I love it, more like that. So,
Leonard, thank you so much for your time. I can't wait to see what you do for Champions Cup next year.